For over 1,000 years, Venice has survived on a delicate, almost impossible compromise with the Adriatic Sea. Built on a foundation of millions of wooden stakes driven into the silt of a shallow lagoon, the city was never meant to be permanent. It was a masterpiece born of defiance. But today, that ancient compromise is officially over. The water is no longer a neighbor, it is a relentless, rising invader. While tourists admire the golden mosaics of St. Mark's Basilica, engineers are watching a digital countdown that never stops. Venice is sinking at a rate of 2 millimeters every year, while the global sea level is rising to meet it with terrifying momentum. In the logic of fluid dynamics, the city is a drowning man gasping for air. If the mathematical models hold, this entire Renaissance landscape will become an underwater tomb by the end of the century. But Italy has refused to surrender. Hidden beneath the waves is a $6.2 billion invisible shield, Project MOSE. It is a project so plagued by corruption, structural decay, and engineering delays that it was once labeled a monument to human greed. This is the brutal, high-stakes reality of the war for Venice. To understand the engineering required to save Venice, you first have to understand the geography of its prison. The Venice Lagoon is a 550 square kilometer basin, a fragile ecosystem connected to the open Adriatic by 3 narrow openings, Lido, Malamocco, and Chioggia. These are the lungs of the city. Twice a day, the tides flush out the canals, removing waste and bringing in fresh oxygen. But these lungs are also the city's greatest existential threat. When a low-pressure system moves over the Mediterranean and the Sirocco wind blows from the south, it pushes the sea through these 3 inlets with a force that defies human control. This phenomenon is known as acqua alta, high water. In November 2019, the sirens screamed for days as the tide surged to 187 centimeters. It was the highest water in half a century. Over 80% of the city was submerged. Salt water, which acts as a corrosive acid to ancient brick and marble, began eating the foundations of history from the inside out. The engineers realized their old defenses were useless. They didn't just need a wall, they needed to hack the geography of the planet itself. The solution was MOSE, Modulo Sperimentale Elettromeccanico. The concept, first proposed in the 1980s, was simple in theory but terrifying in execution. Build a wall that only exists when the city is in danger. They decided to install 78 independent steel gates across the 3 inlets. Most of the time, these gates would lie flat on the seabed, filled with water, invisible to the ships and the delicate marine life of the lagoon. But when the sensors detect a tide hitting the critical 110-centimeter mark, the system activates. The gates rise like the teeth of a mechanical beast, blocking the Adriatic from entering the lagoon. But the scale of this task is staggering. Each gate is 20 to 30 meters wide and up to 5 meters thick. They are hollow steel boxes, weighing up to 300 tons each. To anchor these monsters in the shifting silt and sand of the sea floor, engineers had to push the limits of material science and geotechnical engineering. The heart of the project isn't the massive steel gates, it's the hinges. Each gate is attached to its concrete foundation by 2 massive spherical joints. These are the largest hinges ever forged in human history. They must rotate perfectly while supporting the weight of the gate and the crushing pressure of millions of tons of seawater. The material choice was critical. Engineers selected Super Duplex steel, a high-performance alloy that combines the best properties of austenitic and ferritic steels. It is designed to survive for 100 years in one of the most corrosive environments on Earth, the splash zone of a saltwater sea. But even with the best steel, the engineering challenges were immense. Each hinge is a spherical joint that must allow for movement in multiple directions to compensate for the uneven pressure of the waves. If a single hinge fails, If it seizes due to barnacles, silt, or rust, the entire section of the wall becomes useless. The lagoon becomes a hydraulic trap. The manufacturing of these hinges required a level of precision usually reserved for the aerospace industry, as each gate must move independently, yet as part of a synchronized mechanical symphony. To hold these gates, engineers didn't just dig holes, they built cities under the water. They cast massive concrete foundations, known as caissons, at a specialized shipyard. Each caisson is the size of a 10-story apartment building. These concrete giants, weighing up to 40,000 tons, were towed out to the inlets by tugboats, a logistical nightmare that required perfect weather and precise timing. Once in position, the caissons were slowly sunk into massive trenches carved out of the sea floor. But you cannot simply drop a 40,000-ton block onto sand. The seabed had to be completely reconstructed. Engineers used massive dredging machines to remove millions of cubic meters of sediment. They then reinforced the ground with thousands of steel pilings, driven 150 feet into the earth to ensure the foundations would never shift under the load. This is engineering at its most brutal, battling tides, currents, and the relentless pressure of gravity in a race against the moon. The MOSE gates do not use traditional motors or hydraulics to rise. They are powered by the simplest law of physics, buoyancy. When the gates are at rest on the seabed, they are filled with water, making them heavier than the sea around them. When the command center receives a high tide alert, powerful compressors begin pumping air into the hollow steel structures. As the air forces the water out, the gates become buoyant. They slowly tilt upward at a 60-degree angle, forming a temporary dam. The entire process takes just 30 minutes. But the management of 78 independent gates, each reacting to different wave heights and hydrostatic loads, is a computational nightmare. The system relies on a supercomputer array that analyzes real-time data from sensors across the Adriatic, adjusting the air pressure in each gate to maintain a perfect, unbroken line against the sea. Despite the technical brilliance, Project MOSE almost collapsed under the weight of human greed. For decades, it was a black hole for Italian taxpayers. The cost ballooned by over 400%, and the timeline stretched 15 years past the original deadline. In 2014, a massive corruption scandal rocked the project. Over 30 people, including the mayor of Venice and high-ranking officials of the Consorzio Venezia Nuova, were arrested. Prosecutors revealed a web of bribery and money laundering that had drained hundreds of millions of euros from the construction budget. While politicians were lining their pockets, the submerged gates, the very shield meant to save the city, began to show signs of premature rust and wear. Critics called it a monument to failure and a shame for Italy. The world began to wonder, had Venice spent billions on a shield that would disintegrate before its first real battle? On October 3, 2020, the skeptics were silenced. A massive storm system was moving in, and the tide was predicted to hit 135 centimeters, enough to flood half the city. For the first time in history, the order was given to activate the full system for a real event. One by one, the 78 gates rose from the depths. In 30 minutes, they formed a perfect line across the 3 inlets. The result was a miracle of engineering. While the sea outside was churning with 3-meter waves, the water inside the lagoon remained perfectly still. For the first time in 100 years, the city of Venice remained dry during a major storm surge. St. Mark's Square, usually the first to go under, was untouched. The invisible wall had finally proven that it could work. But the victory comes with a hidden cost. The Venice Lagoon is not a bathtub. It is a living organism. Its health depends on the constant exchange of water with the Adriatic. Every time the MOSE gates rise, they cut off that oxygen supply. Environmentalists warn that if the gates are closed too frequently, the lagoon will stagnate, turning into a toxic pond that kills off local fish and bird populations. Furthermore, the gates themselves require constant, expensive maintenance. Divers must regularly clean the hinges of sand and barnacles, and the steel structures must be monitored for corrosion every single day. The annual cost of keeping the shield alive is estimated at over $100 million. It is a permanent, multi-billion-dollar commitment to a war against nature that can never be truly won. As climate change accelerates, the survival of Project MOSE is in doubt. The system was designed to handle a sea level rise of up to 60 centimeters. But current projections suggest that by the end of the century, the Adriatic could rise by much more. If the sea rises too high, the gates will have to stay closed almost permanently to keep the city dry. At that point, the lagoon will die, and the very essence of Venice, the city that breathes with the tide, will be lost forever. MOSE is a brilliant, desperate gasp for air by a civilization that refuses to let its past drown. It is a $6.2 billion gamble against the inevitable. Engineering can hold the line for now, providing a few more decades of life to a city that should have been underwater centuries ago. But nature is playing a much longer game. The story of Venice and MOSE is a preview of the future for every coastal city on the planet. From New York and London to Shanghai and Tokyo, the battle against the rising abyss has begun. The technology being tested in the Adriatic is a blueprint for the survival of the human species in an era of rising oceans. In Venice, we see the limit of human ingenuity. We see what happens when genius engineers are forced to fight not just the elements, but the corruption and short-sightedness of their own societies. The invisible shield is up, the city is dry, and for now, the Renaissance lives to see another day. But as the sun sets over the lagoon, the sound of the compressors is a reminder. The tide is always coming back.